This is the video lesson for personal narrative. What is your story really about? And by now in the writing process, we have picked our seed idea, and we have gone from pre-writing to drafting. And I have a few different charts up here for you to look at, and they all pretty much say the same thing. First, we collect a bunch of entries, we pick an idea, we write around that idea, we draft it, we get it on the page, and then we go into revising. And it happens pretty quick, which I'm excited about, because no one wants to spend months and months on the same piece of writing. We're going to move through this first piece of writing pretty quick, and then we're going to start a whole nother one. And today's work that we're doing is the revising step. And you can kind of think of revision, as re-envisioning. And so today I want to teach you that when we let ourselves be guided by the question, what is my story really about? We find ourselves wanting to tell our story in a completely new way. And my seed idea that I started with was about Tyler's cut finger. And as I started working through today's lesson on what is my story really about, I came up with some ideas. The panic that overcomes a mom could be what it's really about. How I'm really not as calm and cool in these emergency situations as I thought I was going to be. And of course, how a cut finger really is pretty minor in the scheme of things. But to be honest with you, this idea that I had of Tyler's cut finger and writing about it just didn't feel right. The last week or so, I've been playing around with the idea of having this be my seed idea, and I just didn't feel like it was what I wanted it to be. And so I found myself at the weirdest times, emptying the dishwasher or driving to work, thinking about there's another story I really want to tell. And so before I go on with today's lesson of what my story is really about, I want to offer you the suggestion that if you ever feel like your seed idea isn't going anywhere, you are welcome to pick a new one. Pick something that works for you. And the story that kept coming to mind for me was this idea I shared with you at the beginning of the year of the last visit I had at the farmhouse. And here's some pictures just so you can kind of get an idea of what I picture in my head as the farmhouse. And this idea for me has more meaning. And so I'm actually going to scrap the whole seed idea of Tyler's cut finger. That's important to him, and it is important, but it doesn't have as much meaning as this memory has for me. And so what I did, you'd be proud of me, is this weekend I actually got out my writer's notebook and I started just a quick entry on the last visit at the farmhouse. And ironically enough, can you look at where the paperclip is on this page? Because the paperclip on the other side was where I had picked Tyler's cut finger. Maybe something deeper was telling me that that was the wrong idea, and look what's on the other side of the paperclip, the last visit to the farmhouse. So I quickly drafted something out, which, by the way, is like a flash draft. It might go somewhere, it might not. But what I want to start doing is thinking about what is the meaning of this last visit to the farmhouse. And these were actually some pictures I took this summer. The summer was winding down on the visit. And the one on the left, I know you think is pretty amazing, and I should probably quit teaching right this second and go into photography. This was a picture I took when my sister had just pulled out of the driveway to say goodbye, and I was all mopey and sad with Tyler walking back, and we saw the sun setting, and we thought, that's a sweet picture. So Tyler and I went out and took a bunch. And then the picture on the right is when I was, again, being super sad and mopey, and Tyler was kind of just sitting throwing rocks the last day we were there, the second before we were about to leave. And I was feeling sappy and took another picture. So I was trying to use these as inspiration for what could this story really be about. So I started sketching out some ideas. New seed idea, last visit to the farmhouse. What is my story really about? Well, I think it's about that all these happy memories I have that are packed up from when I was really little all the way through just this September. Those memories are worth cherishing. I think it's about interestingly enough, that all the love and emotion that can come from a place. I mean, it's just a farmhouse. It's just a bunch of wood with some cement floors and some, concrete and a few barns and some fields. So why is it that it's just a place, but it can have so much emotion? And then I also thought that maybe saying goodbye is hard. Even when it's for the best, it's still really hard to say goodbye. So here's where I stopped and jotted some ideas of what my story could really be about. I want you to pause the video. I want you to get your writer's notebook out. In the Create section, you can date it, today's date, which is November 9th. And the seed idea, I don't know what your seed idea is. You'll have to jot that in. And then list out what is your story really about. Maybe push for 2 or 3 things that you think you can draft of what your story is really about. All right, now that you're back, we have to think, okay, what's my next step? Now that I know what my story is really about, I have this draft. And let me pause to tell you that the drafts I read that you had started, the flash drafts, I read them this weekend. And I am so proud of each and every one of you. So many of you are putting so much thought and emotion onto the page, and you're telling these compelling stories of heartbreak and loss of a pet or a broken family, or exciting times of when you got a new addition to the family, or you won your first award, or just silly backyard fun things like slip and slide. You guys are really taking a chance and putting your seed ideas on the page, and for that I'm so proud of you. But now, like you're thinking, what do I do next? What's my next step? And so this is where I'm hoping today's lesson of what's my story really about, I'm hoping that we can use that to guide our drafts. So when you get your draft back, we're going to start to think about this idea of a story mountain. And chances are most of your drafts, like mine, are not in story mountain form. Pause the video and go ahead and read all these different elements of a story mountain, starting with the exposition, to the rising action, to the climax, to the falling action, to the resolution. Now that you're back and you've read all the descriptors, you know that you have this handout in the Learn section of your writer's notebook. We got it the day before Halloween, and we put it in there thinking about our Halloween stories. But we're going to use this today to guide our work. And what I did was took that really nice, neat chart, and I did a version of my own, which is not as neat. But that's kind of how writing can be. It can be messy. So I'm going to have you try out this idea of a story mountain in your writer's notebook. And you're probably going to have to pause the video here in a minute and really study what I did. Because you can see my story mountain has two hills. Because the top hill is the external events that happened, and the bottom hill is the internal events that happened. And the internal one is where we're going to start to get at the heart of our story. What's our story really about? And so for me, I picked that my story is really about either saying goodbye and how hard that can be, or the love that can come from a place. And maybe I'll somehow blend those two ideas together in the story. But I've picked one of my what is my story really about, and I put that at the bottom of the page. And then you can see that my external story mountain doesn't really even fit at all the entry, the flash draft that I had. Because I decided my flash draft was just a bunch of random thoughts on the page. I need to actually tell the story starting at the beginning. And so for me, the first thing that tells the story of the farmhouse is when we were back in our backyard this summer at Tyler's birthday party, and my dad had kind of announced to the family that they sold the farm. And then I jumped from that moment all the way to the peak of my story mountain, because then I'm trying to think of, okay, what's the most, plot turning point? What's the most dramatic part of the story that I want to tell? And that's me driving away from the farmhouse, heading back to the airport. And you can see that I kind of have two events at the top of my story mountain. I have driving away, and then I also have that last pickup ride. I think I'm going to scooch over the last pickup ride a little one down on my story mountain. That's not as dramatic as the most dramatic event. So you should pause the video right now. You should start to sketch out your external versus your internal. And now that we're back, you might have a couple things sketched out on your external story mountain, but we need to fill in the gaps, and then we need to do our internal story mountain. So if I fill in the gaps on my external story mountain, I did a couple events between when I heard the farm was going to sell and when I was driving away. And so I did a couple events of me saying, of course, I'll fly out and help. And then my next event on the story mountain was when we were actually there cleaning out the house. And then you can see going down my resolution on the other side of the external story mountain. At the bottom, the resolution, it's kind of the relief that my grandparents have from not having to maintain such a big farmhouse anymore. That's kind of like the feel-good ending. And maybe you don't have a feel-good ending, but it's hopefully some kind of realization or something that you've thought through. And then I have this other part on my story mountain I'm not sure if I'm going to keep. It's about me saying that it's not about me. I just have to have the sad moment, and then I'm going to move on with things. And so these are some external ideas. Pause the video, finish your external story mountain. All right, now that you're back, we're going to think about the internal story mountain. So draw another hill underneath. And for every external event, we want to think about what did we internally feel for that event. For instance, when my dad told me that we sold the farm on Tyler's birthday, I instantly felt excited for my grandparents. And then I started having all these questions that were just kind of like ticking away. Like, well, who's going to buy it? And who's going to live in it? And are they going to take as good of care of it? And I'm never going to get out there again. And when's going to be my last time there? And all these emotions started hitting. It was first excitement, and then it turned to like worry and dread. Of course, I'll fly out there. You can tell on my internal story mountain that was me thinking that I'm going to be the strong granddaughter to help them. I'm going to be proud. But of course, I selfishly wanted to go out there and say goodbye. I selfishly wanted one more time out there. You can see that cleaning out the house, the external event, the internal thoughts through that was that I remember it being so fun with my sister and sister-in-law. We were kind of being bossy to my grandma, telling her that she couldn't keep all these things she wanted to keep. We'd hold up one outfit after another and laugh, telling her she had to get rid of stuff. And then now I get to the climax of the story, the last pickup ride and driving away. And internally, that was where I was filled with sadness. And when I think about it, it's a different kind of sadness. I knew everything was going to be fine, but I still had this pain, this gut-wrenching, just, it's over kind of feeling. And so I'm trying to pull away the idea that saying goodbye is hard and that I have this love in this place. And where does that love show up? It's going to show up in some of these internal events. So pause the video and try to think through what are your internal emotions that match the external events. And here's another example of an external versus internal story arc that might be a little bit more neat than mine, but you can get an idea of what's going on. You have to pause the video and study it. Again, this is another version, so I'm not familiar with this girl's story, but you can read her ideas about her basketball game and how she gets external actions to match her internal emotions. And as you wind up the video, you want to think about all the things we've learned about how to write powerful personal narratives. Back when we started thinking of people and places that matter, through climbing inside and writing from that narrator's point of view, to making our characters say the words that show their personalities, to writing memorable leads, all the way down to the bottom one, thinking about what is my story really about. And so I don't know where your next step is. For you, that might be like mine. I'm going to redraft a whole new story today, following a story mountain. Maybe for some of you, that'll be looking at your flash draft and thinking, how can I break this up into a story mountain? And then once it's there, how do I stretch out that climax, the most exciting part? Maybe for some of you, you still need to get your thoughts on the page or start a new seed idea. Whatever your next step is, I'm going to ask today that you take it. Carry on, my writers.